It's all about, like, Frank Zappa said he didn't care about cosmic debris, and he was always making fun of these things. But actually, once I read, Gail claimed she heard voices.
Yes.
So, and he himself had some weird experiences. So, it's like you said before, he was very careful what he put out because he knew he could not put himself like that in.
Yeah, he wanted to appear as serious as possible since he was presenting such an absurd landscape of sound. Now, he, in the Bob Marshall interview, this is brought up, and Bob asked him why in this 1969 interview, when you asked about being psychic, you said no comment. And he said, well, you don't talk about that kind of stuff with someone who wouldn't understand it. So he admitted right there that he's familiar with the psychic world or whatever he meant by it, and he wasn't going to talk about it to a teenager, for a pop magazine. Maybe it was
yes, and the ideas that Ion talks about make us wonder and see, for example, when Frank Zappa says he never really studied composition, but he's doing these very, very complex pieces.
By synesthesia. He mixes his senses. That's where he looked different. He just knew to not limit it to sound. Remember when he was describing how he instructed the symphony players to do these crazy things?
Yes.
Yeah, as long as he thought about, I'm not limited to sound, I can include other stuff, it didn't necessarily mean it was complicated 16, 18 rhythms or something. He just brought in other sensory modalities, which created humor and the sense of the absurd. He didn't limit himself to sound expertise, even though he could do it.
Yes, but anyway, it's. I think he's like a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it makes one wonders about many different aspects of what are we really, how do we really perceive, how do we really create? Because there are some phenomena, some mystery men artists that claim they are told to do things, and I can illustrate this with the painter we discovered last week, Augustin Lesage.
Augustin Lesage, yeah, Lesage.
Yeah, he started working in a coal mine when he was a child, because Ion says we need carbon. But they will start at 3 a.m. in the morning, work 12 hours, and they use physical force. They were in the mines, in the darkness, alone, very deep, down in the earth. And when he was 35, he heard a voice that said, "You're going to be a painter." And this thing repeated every day. And he was a very simple man, and he started to think, maybe I'm crazy. And he went to the cafe or bar, bistro, whatever, after work and asked one of his companions, "Do you think spirits can talk?" And he told him, "Yes, that's called spiritism. There are people who can do that." So he went to find a group and went to a seance. And during the seance, these spirits told him exactly to buy a canvas with these measurements and very specific names of paintings, like brown sienna, and the paintings, they always have very specific names. So he was impressed. He said, "Okay, I'll do what they say, and he started painting. But when he got the canvas, it was like real big, like 3 meters, really big. He could not even. He had no idea what he was doing, and he was sort of scared just to see this big canvas. But the voices said, "Don't worry, we'll tell you what to do. Just do it." So he started painting after these very long hours in the mine. After 12 hours of very hard physical work, he started painting in the night, very complex paintings.
Yes.
That they are very symmetrical. And after a while, somebody was impressed by that, and he became his agent, but he said, "I would like to have some scientists studying your work, because this is not normal." Just to have the physical force to do that after such hard work is already amazing. And then the complexity of what he was painting without... He never had
any training,
drawn or painted.
Yeah, he didn't know anything about it.
And so, because the paintings were symmetrical, the scientist said, "Okay, we're going to cover half of the painting. You paint only the half, and then you do the other half. We'll see if what you claim is true, if they're telling you what to paint they know." And he did. He could paint without seeing the cover half. He could paint the other exact mirror image of this complex painting.
Yeah, very detailed.
Yes, amazing. It's something we could do now with a computer, but without a computer, and he was not even measuring or doing any preparation work or anything. He just did it direct on.
Wow.
So they said, "Well, we cannot explain this." The scientist said, "Mystery landscape, cosmic debris." Weird stuff.
Yes.
But like that, there are many different works of art that have like many layers of meaning, very, very complex. People can study these works their whole lives. And it's like, how could a human put all that information in that work, like in the Bible, in Finnegan's Wake, in the work of Nostradamus, the paintings of Michelangelo and Leonardo. They're like people studying them for years. And
they studied him? Did you say they studied him for years?
Well, the works. The
works, yeah.
Like you've been studying Finnegan's Wake for many years.
Yes.
And Ian said they work together with these artists, and many times the artists themselves don't know what they're doing.
Okay,
because we are confronted with the mystery landscape, with talking to Ian. That's why I would like to talk about cosmic debris.
Right. So he worked in the mines for 25 years or something, and then that led to the control came in and started talking to him. I worked in the intellectual mines, researching all these geniuses, and that led to Ion. That's the parallel there. Now, I'm just showing Carolyn some of the paintings. Now, if you look, you take that painting, Carolyn, they would cover up, the scientists would cover up that half, right?
And they're like 9 meters big or 8 or very big formats.
Big what?
They're very big paintings. Like
yeah, these are huge, Carolyn. They'd cover up that half and ask him to paint that without seeing it. And then he would paint the exact mirror of it by being told by the voice what to do. But these very complex situations, he would able to do the task. Yeah, without knowing what was on that side. There he seems to see. But look how big the canvas is. So I just wanted to explain. I don't know if she was getting that. So you want to show...
Listen, usually we talk about things that show up like that. We usually don't prepare, like, we are going to talk this week about this. Like...
that showed up this week. You never heard of the guy.
No, for some reason I think it's a way of showing... Because I was very impressed that you said you didn't know all this information is on the drawing of the column, of the product.
Yes.
For example, you turn the bottle upside down and you see these three faces with the crown of the flower of leaves, and they're on. This same sort of cartoon face of the king is behind King Frank in one of his most famous paintings. It's like a part of the brocade of the clothes on the wall, the tapestry on the wall. And I've seen that painting many times before, but then until I saw it again, I really saw. So there are many things put like on the environment. The whole environment is like a big creation of many layers of meaning.
Yes.
And that's what McLuhan is
showing.
Decoding. Showing.
Yeah. Decoding, yes.
He also talks a lot about the code breakers.
Yes.
Because like Ian says, we put a lot of things on the environment to remember. And we might not be aware that all these things, all these layers of meaning are there, and it's really amazing how the medium is the message. It's really the synthesis of the whole evolution of humankind since the fall.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
It's all about what was the message, what was the medium.
Yeah.
Everything was evolving to get back to talk with the non-physical.
Yes. Yeah, the medium.
And the situation is so amazing, is that how could you understand this without Joyce and McLuhan?
Yes.
It will make no sense.
So, I have a review here. Okay, was there another point you were making? So this guy, so Zappa had something communicating to him all the time. He would go on vacation, and just more songs were coming through him. So he couldn't stop. So you would say that was himself talking to himself. But the way he was secretive about talking about the psychic, for example, he has in his questionnaire, when you want to become a member in the late 60s of the United Mutations, the group he formed, the United Mutations, like fan club.
But you see, there is a cue to the mutation of the drops of the blood.
Right, United Mutations, and he asked the question: is God ESP? That's a very good question. Garrett Dean used to say that a spiritual experience or ego death or something like that, a transcendent experience, was a psychic event that happened to you. It'd be like an anomaly. And it would probably have to be a pretty big one or a deep one. But he saw that the revelation was having one of these experiences. So to actually experience deep ESP, is that God? Is that something that makes you diminish your own particular desires? Now, Ion says that's not wise, but the tradition was to get rid of your ego and become humble. And that a psychic experience might do that to you. At least the thoughts that you were focused on and the desires you focus on would be displaced, and you have a new motivation. So is God ESP? That's a really important question. Most people don't think if they have ESP that it's God. So it means a psychic experience is what gets translated into God, like the burning bush thing that Moses had. So that's why he wouldn't talk to a teenage journalist about the psychic. He would have to explain some of his deepest thoughts. So this is shown in his music and how he made it. So with that in mind, let me read a review of Waka Jawaka, which is the other album that came out at the same time as Grand Wazoo. And these were made while Frank was recuperating from his accident in December 1971. So let's just see what this reviewer says. I think it is pretty good. So this guy is called Rob Houghton, and this is a review in Rolling Stone magazine. He says, although it doesn't happen often, whenever Frank Zappa goes about the task of purging himself of his normal ration of acrimony, contempt, bile, and phlegm, he sometimes comes forth with an album that is every bit the musical experience that he always claimed he could produce. So he's saying he thinks Frank gets rid of his normal acrimony, contempt, bile, and phlegm. So then Mr. Houghton says, with the exception of the astonishing work he and his musicians did on Hot Rats a couple of years ago, much of Zappa's musical output has been too malnourished to support his artistic pretensions. Now, that's not true, but people couldn't hear what he was doing back then. You know, we can go back to stuff that came out before Hot Rats. That's pretty awesome. But this is the Rolling Stone party line. Frank used to complain about Rolling Stone that they never gave him a decent review. So this guy is saying, but they couldn't deny Waka Jawaka. His excursions into jazz with the Mothers of Invention were never more than pale imitations of Miles Davis and Ornette Coleman, overlaid with effects copped from Edgar Varese, and most of his serious compositions contain large helpings from the glut of modern music. Originality has never been Zappa's strong point. Now, isn't that nuts? It's not the content. They're missing the collage effect that Frank was communicating, the invisible landscapes in your normal TV environment. Sometimes people hear Zappa's music and they always sounds like, you know, the soundtrack to a movie. But he was showing the multi-textures in the quadraphenic media early Android meme, but people couldn't see that effect. They only saw, well, that sounds familiar. He's not original. He got that from Stravinsky. He didn't see what Zappa was collaging. Basically, it was high art and low art. Highbrow music, lowbrow.
Yes, and the thing with the soundtrack, the film soundtrack, according to Ion, everything we do is actually record, and it's like reality is the muffin studio. We are all recording this experience. And this experience, what we call reality, is not even really understood. It's a kind of internal simulation that is made by our brain from the frequencies, the input we get. But there is a wide range of frequencies and radiation and stuff. We don't even know about that. We cannot. It's beyond the range of what we can perceive. So our perception of reality is false. But
is what cold? What did you say? Is gold?
It's not the real reality. We just perceive a distortion. A very small range of the whole wide frequencies that exist.
So this guy, this reviewer, is only seeing a small part of Zappa's method. He's not getting the... Remember Zappa said, well, I read it, a couple of weeks ago, what you hear is not what I'm about. I'm about what you can't hear. He says the album... Yeah, it might have been the week you were missing. I was talking to Bert about it. But yeah, he said, actually, what you hear in the album is not what it's about. See, so he was working on the level of the new medium, the new invisible environment, not just with sound. And that's exactly what McLuhan was trying to show. So if that's a new statement for you, we'll have to try to find that someday. Read it to you. But yeah, he said it right there.
That's amazing, because actually not only his work is about what we cannot hear, but the whole of reality. I mean, we don't really know how the brain works, perception, what is matter, what is what we call space-time, and how the body really works and the real functions. For example, Ian is telling us about what's the real function of the hypothalamus and the heart and the different substances that are secreted.
Chromosome 14.
We still don't know. Dr. Dean knows a little more than the rest of humanity.
Right, and the image that we have of the brain, and that we have a brain, that may not be accurate to what is actually creating consciousness or feeling. It's not just stuck in the brain. That's another part. So what scientists explain, we perceive in order to survive and procreate. That's the mantra. We evolved to. Evolution was the goal was just to survive, but we know the goal was actually to not worry about survival. The goal was not to worry about survival.
Yes, because if we go back to activating all these what they call the trash DNA and to change, he said the liquid of the heart will become heavier, and all these changes that are happening in the body. Then the goal of evolution was not what most scientists think.
That's right. So.
And it's not about that, or maybe yes, it is adapting to the environment, but the environment is changing, and this we have to engage the mystery landscape in order to make this new evolution. There is no other way.
And remembering.
Without
evolution and remembering. And it gets cheeky if you start using the word evolution too much, because it's not unfolding in a linear way or a progressive way.
Yes, because that was the talk during the last century. So evolution, but somehow the physical body, was not evolving.
Right. Okay, so let me continue the review. So the guy says originality has never been Zappa's strong point. So that's a silly statement. But it's a different kind of originality that Zappa was coming up with. So this particular album, called Wacka Jawacka, and the band is called Hot Rats. Wacka Jawacka - Hot Rats, while a little more than a long delayed extension of the original Hot Rats album, came out in '69, is one of Zappa's most enjoyable, less hyper-tense efforts. And while it may lack the tightness... What's that echo? Why am I getting an echo?
Maybe it's me.
Yeah, maybe you shifted something. Okay. This album is one of Zappa's most enjoyable, less hyper-tense efforts, and while it may lack the tightness, the rock-based energy of its predecessor, it contains some of the best material he's done in years. Wacka Jawacka may well be something of a fence-mending job by Zappa. After his execrable, which mainly means shitty, after his shitty work on 200 Motels, which has got to be one of the all-time attempts by a musician and composer to discredit himself. See how Rolling Stone talks about him? It's like Frank was offering the alternative to Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone was marketing the lower frequencies, the new mainstream of newness frequencies.
I think any musician will completely disagree with that person because the soundtrack of 200 Metals is really good. It's real music.
Yeah.
Not rock and roll.
So you're not agreeing with the reviewer?
No, I don't think anybody who really knows about music could say that.
That's right. And this Rob Houghton, I don't recognize the name. He didn't go on to become a well-known critic. He's probably CIA. Just been brought in to smear Frank, or some John Bert's extreme fascist kind of guy. But it's silly. So then he says, the musicians brought in for Waka Jawaka are not the stellar personalities that graced the first Hot Rats album. Captain Beefheart and Sugarcane Harris are gone, replaced by newer faces that include Tony Duran on slide guitar, Sal Marquez on trumpets, and Don Preston on moog and piano. They comprise a tight, disciplined group. The first song is a 17-minute extravaganza called Big Swifty, which moves on the strength of Zappa's guitar and Marquez's horns through enough changes to add up to a solid modern jazz suite. It is something to appreciate, even though it could well be called second-rate Miles Davis, and is even leagues behind Weather Report's recent, quote, I Sing the Body Electric, unquote. In inventiveness, it's way behind that, in inventiveness and power. And at only 17 minutes in length, Big Swifty seems rather lightweight for a full-side piece. But that's just quibbling. It's good. It stands up to repeated listenings and is, along with the title cut, one of the best things on the album. So I guess it took up the whole side, but it was only 17 minutes long. Side 2 has Your Mouth. Not Your Mouth, Roxy's. This is in quotes. It's Your Mouth, that's the title. A lapse back into Zappa's patented spitefulness. It is vapid and trite, a puerile exercise in sluggish swing. And then the next instrumental cut, whatever, piece. It just might be a one-shot deal. Now, that wouldn't mean anything to people then, but once you knew later the larger conceptual continuity of Zappa, then this statement is really important. It just might be a one-shot deal. Is good old Mother's music, a chaotic arrangement of acoustic, slide, Hawaiian, and pedal steel guitars. Waka Jawaka, another song, rounds out the album with an 11-minute jazz improvisation. Maybe, and then the guy says, maybe Frank Zappa is just getting mellow for the first time in his career. Now, remember, Zappa becomes blatantly different within a year, you know. See, these guys are trying to put anthropomorphic aging trends on Zappa. He's just starting. He's going to have many monstrous forms he's going to take. So maybe Frank Zappa is just getting mellow for the first time in his career, or maybe it's just a phase. Either way, while Waka Jawaka may lack the brilliance of Hot Rats or the capacity for irritation that exists in some of the Mother's material, it's a distinctive album, which in his case is either a sign of maturity or evidence of exhaustion. They can't even sort of praise a work that Frank made without taking shots at him, which is what they used to do about McLuhan, too.
That's the battle.
Yeah, the battle for identity. Okay, now, do you have another point? What I want to do eventually, when you're finished saying whatever you want to say, I want to finish the article in Downbeat magazine, the jazz magazine, about the Grand Mazoo era and some other things that Frank said that we didn't get to. So,
well, I think his idea of the cosmic debris and the instrument actually link to the Grand Mazoo and what most people now talk about, all this conspiracy stuff.
Yes.
Because everybody has this idea that what we perceive as reality is somehow manipulated, and the science, the quantum physics show that the observer somehow defines what is real. Nothing really exists until there is an observer.
Now that's what I would say. We create our experience. So LaRouche would come along and say, those guys back there at the Solvay conference in 1927 in Copenhagen, I think it was, they're just theosophists and occultists and Fabian socialists. He would name off all the influences in British intelligence. And they're just injecting that occult nonsense into modern physics. And what's interesting is that they probably were putting in yin-yang knowledge in their physics, but it doesn't mean that it was wrong the way LaRouche says it is. But once we have the perspective of Ion, it's you can forgive anybody doing whatever trivial little propaganda they're trying to make in their science or art, because it unfolds to a larger thing. What?
There is like a flip.
Yes.
Science becomes the big fraud, and the mystery landscape is actually proven to be
real.
And there are all these creations shown by Ion where they show as like the castles and this very complex system of things that really have a logic. The Nostradamus prophecies, the Finnegan's Wake, and the Bible. All these things that Ion and you have been presenting and talking about at the beginning is like, what are they talking about? It's such a wide range of information. But then when you start studying these different things, they all start making sense, and you start seeing the message of the medium.
Of the medium, right.
From the Genesis,
yes,
to the non-physical. and it's really impressive.
So
that you are not only the big wazoo, but the Mr. Man.
Yeah, we're presenting the new song that Zappa was reaching for.
Yes.
Yeah, the new song. So Augustin Lesage does this. There are not too many painters who were mediums and were around for people to study and test. He's pretty unique that way, correct?
Yeah.
And we didn't even know about him last week. This is something we've acquired over the past 7 days, and it is pretty interesting phenomenon.
Actually, for example, all the surrealists knew about him.
Yeah.
And that's why they retrieved the automatic writing and some of these...
you mean Lesage inspired their automatic writing attempts?
Yes, they knew about this...
right. That's amazing.
Non-rational phenomenon.
Yeah, non-rational. Yeah.
And they wanted to explore this landscape. Breton retrieved the automatic writing of the Spiritism.
Yeah.
And trying to reconnect to the non-physical, but of course they didn't know. But as McLuhan says, the artists, without knowing, are already presenting these things in their work, like Zappa trying to do faster, more complex music that could not even be played by musicians. He had to go to the synclavier. And it's like, why will composers want to make faster, complex music? Because everything is speeding up, and in a way he was showing
what they're going to be forced to do.
Step.
Yeah, so when he went...
McLuhan also said the information we get, like maybe in a week, is what people maybe had their whole life before. What we have to digest in one day.
They got one life.
Something that maybe people before will know about in their whole lives. And this is speeding up of digesting all this information.
Now, one thing about that, if you clarify, there's no point in seeing every bit of information that happens, and nobody takes in all the information. So the people before the printing press, they had very lively, active sensory lives, but they weren't processing visual data, alphabetic data, and that stuff. And so the alphabetic data that we have, visual and digital data, is an acceleration of input. But what people live, what they live with their bodies today may be quite limited compared to how people live with their bodies before the printing press. They probably did go to parallel worlds. It was a lot more understood. But once you get into the effect of the book and you're studying all this content information, you then come to the electric age where it starts throwing the content information at you, and you don't know that the book itself has suppressed a whole right hemisphere access to anomalies. So we got to qualify about how we're different today. You could say that people live today, and if the brain takes in information, whether you know it or not, then they're processing a lot, but they're actually not noticing as much as someone 500 years ago who had a smaller environment to notice, but noticed it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you bring in that what's the change for the chemical body, what's the change for the chip body. So that's what I qualify what you're saying there about. McLuhan would say we live 200 years every 12 months. But it is more than just information processing. The fact you're on the phone and go somewhere else and that place comes to you, that's a different kind of experience. And you're doing that all the time. You can't even measure it almost. The number of times
yes, and now we have the layer of the hyper-reality.
Yeah.
All these projections and holograms, the cyber reality mixing with the real, and what is the real.
Right.
So
I wanted to say this. In light of what you said, Zappa went into the synclavier, and most people thought it was ridiculous. Where's the human element? Doesn't he want to work with human beings? And you personally witnessed, 30 years later, all these young people, they wouldn't compose without reality that the synclavier represented. It's not an issue for them, right? So it was an issue when Frank was doing it, but he was predicting and acting out what kids would be doing 30 years later.
Yes, François Bell, a French composer, the director of the Groupe de Recherche Musicale, he said, we will always need the hand to press the buttons, even if it's only to turn on, and then everything is programmed, but there is always the human factor there.
Yeah. Well, what about they're getting studies with the, astronauts or pilots that they can move things with their thought. We're definitely going to get to the point where we won't have to push the button. Our thought frequencies will alter the screen or whatever we're using to create a composition. So that's a bit of nostalgia. We will always have the end.
That's the metaphor to say that without the human, there is no creation. I mean, there is automation and programs, but will somehow, someday, the machines create.
Yes.
Because he said if you take the energy off, all these machines stop working. But, maybe there is another type of...
There'll be another kind of experience. The cliche definitions of being imaginative or creative won't apply. A lot of the imaginative, creative skills that the body can do, the digital world will do. But there'll be new kinds of creativity for the essence of human existence, whatever that is. You don't want to say it's a human, but whatever it is that we think we are, the anthropomorphic physical, will be doing new kinds of things. So
yes, and for example, in the case of music, many object that this very complex program music is cold. It lacks something.
Yeah.
That is this imprecision of humans.
But see, that would be the lack of sentiment, emotions. And Ian says we're in a post-love world. That may mean post-sentiment. I don't know if it means post, what's he called? Force field, post-force field. I doubt it. But those kids that you see in those monthly seminars, they don't consider it cold what they're doing. You can see why someone who grew up with the previous musical instrumentality, it would be shocking, the digital thing, and seem cold. But when a kid grows up in it, it's not cold. So there's no point in making a thought that's critical, that's sort of saying, oh, this is going downhill or this is going uphill. The technique of the suspended judgment was what was discovered in the 20th century, and that's what McLuhan used and Zappa used. That's what is recommended here. Don't worry too much about your feelings or sentiments about what you're engaging. You'll get feeling enough. And and Zappa said that. He says, "I'm not going to make love songs. They're bad for you."
Yes, and actually, that was part of his battle. That since the Romantic period, emotions were so in the foreground that.
In his day, when he was young?
No, before, since the 19th century.
Yes. Yeah.
The emotion became like a very big part of the work of art.
Yes.
The emotions that this work will evolve.
Yeah, people didn't think, let me just add this point, they didn't think that the technological, the cold, hard machinery world around them was molding or influencing the artist. They thought there were feelings, ideas, emotions, sentiments. They didn't know. That's why McLuhan's main agenda in art criticism was to point out the technological communicating situation around the art is what is a big influence on the art, not the ideas of the artist.
Yes, and Zappa criticizes this type of cheesy archetypes.
Yeah. What'd you call it? CC archetypes? What'd you say?
Cheesy, like...
Cheesy, yes, Susie Cream Cheese. Cheesy archetypes.
Yes. That's not real love. That's not real emotion. It's just like a program. They're telling you, this is how you should feel, this is what you should say.
Right. Okay, so...
It's exactly the opposite of what the
artist is showing.
Yeah.
Exact opposite. So let me continue this article. It's called Meet the Grand Wazoo, November 9th, 1972 issue of Downbeat. So the last paragraph we had read was, Zappa regards Earl Dumler. And did you change something? There's the echo coming in. Did you mute or defragment or something? You started to move around, right?
I'm going to my room to see if the video is uploaded.
Okay, so that seems to cause a little echo when you move. Hopefully that's not going to be a problem.
I'm in a bigger room now.
No, it's not Bill. Okay, Zappa regards Earl Dumler.
Your initiation counterblasted is uploaded.
Okay, good. The latest edition of the new song goes out for all the dangling ganglia. This
is a complement of what we're talking about.
Yes, a complementary.
It's all about exploring all the environments, and now we are into the mystery landscape.
Yeah. So Zappa regards Earl Dumler and his oddity as his one concession to overt showmanship. So Frank's saying there's only a little bit of showmanship, the theatricality in here, and that's from Mr. Dumler. and he had the distinction of making love to the contrabass sousaphone, to its double reed. Earl Dumler has a dubious distinction of making love to its double reed. So then, as Frank put it, with a face as straight as his baton, quote, "It's possible for the first time to view a grown man with a mod haircut struggling against the forces of nature to extract accurate intonation from an amplified E-flat contrabass sousaphone," unquote. Charles Owens put it in more down-to-earth terms when talking about the tone it produces. Quote, "Sounds like an elephant playing soprano sax." Then it says, "With all respect to Dumler," says the journalist, "and his struggles against natural forces, I must agree with Charles Owens' observation. As for the rest of the band, I had a chance to hear the whole wazoo during a rehearsal at the Glendale Civic Auditorium. The rehearsal was called for 1 p.m. It was nearly 2 when Zappa hobbled in. His left leg is still in a brace from an incident last year in London when an overzealous fan knocked Zappa off the stage of the Rainbow Theatre into the orchestra pit 15 feet below. Zappa dispassionately, look at that, no emotions, he dispassionately greeted his retinue of friends, assistants, hangers-on, photographers, and since no one manned the doors, also curiosity seekers lured by the bedlam of 20 pieces warming up." Did you get that? Zappa dispassionately greeted his retinue of friends, assistants, and hangers-on, photographers, and fans. Apparently Frank thrives on such chaos. He limped over to the centrally located stand that contained all his scores, tapped on it with a Benson and Hedges length baton, called a tune was for Calvin and his next 2 hitchhikers. Now that's about me and Carolyn. We were driven by Calvin the year before this recording, the summer of 71. It could be he picked up all kinds of hitchhikers, but we get included in that. The guy says, the journalist says, the title for Calvin and his next 2 hitchhikers, and he says in brackets, "You were expecting maybe Stardust?" And the Grand Wazoo was making music. It was kind of ragged around the edges, but much of the blame belonged to Zappa. Not only are his charts awkward, but his conducting technique is jerky, usually unclear and always timid, which comes as a surprise from a cat that looks so evil. But the fact remains, he seldom kicked off the tempo before giving the downbeat. And when the wazoo was in motion, Zappa failed to indicate precisely where one, O-N-E in quotes, could be found in the midst of unmotivated tempo changes. I think you understand that better than I do, that sense. Does that make sense to you?
Read it again.
Zappa seldom kicked off the tempo before giving the downbeat. And when the Grand Wazoo, when the orchestra was in motion, Zappa failed to indicate precisely where one is in quotes, where one could be found in the midst of unmotivated tempo changes. Does he mean one beat, or you? Does he mean you, the player, or the listener? I don't know what he means by one. He has to indicate precisely where one could be found in the midst of unmotivated tempo changes. I guess the downbeat. Now, what if Zappa was doing that intentionally? Anyways,
well, maybe he did a lot of tempo changes.
Yeah.
And maybe for some people may perceive that as a mistake. Like, if you are used to listen to 4-beat music, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you have these complex beats, it's like, is that supposed to be like that?
Yeah, it sort of swerves and slides off the road a bit, slips on an ice patch. Yes, he would slide. Yeah, that's funny. I'm so used to listening to music, it never occurred to me that it's wrongly done. But yes, back in 72, a first time listening of Innocent Ears would say, "My God, Zappa, he didn't even bother editing the fucking piece. He just a bunch of drunk musicians."
It was meant to be like that. It was not like they were lost.
Right, but people would think, "Oh my God, he got some drunk musicians who can't even keep the beats." And and make the wrong accents and the wrong noises. No wonder they thought. I mean, there were people back then who would say, that guy is an incredibly lousy musician. I mean, his music makes no sense. Now it's beautiful. It's a national treasure. More and more people appreciate it. But it was pretty funny back then how shocking Zappa was for people, his output. Like, there was a famous Canadian talk show, Peter Zosky, and he's interviewing Flo and Eddie, the Turtles, after they had left Frank on CBC on Friday night. It was actually the night before we flew to L.A., and we were on the same plane as them. I think I told that story. So we're watching it, Carol and I, and Zosky is really curious to find out from them what was Zappa like, because he says, that guy, he made the most ridiculous music. It wasn't even music. This is what Zosky was saying, and he's supposed to be an educated, sophisticated person. And Flo and Eddie say, well, it was too much coffee. Because, you know, like Zappa was known to drink a lot of coffee, so they probably meant it. Yeah, too much coffee. That's why he produced lousy music. Anyways, it's really a good example of Zappa's career of what you learn in McLuhan's book, Through the Vanishing Point, where new technological environment happens, new communication system, and then weird new art happens. And it takes a while for people to realize it's reflecting the patterns of the new technological environment. Well, Zappa was reflecting the perceptions of a new environment, and people couldn't see that. And so it sounded like he was...
Yes, actually, his many tempo changes is this... I mean, now we are used to see a film with a lot of images coming, boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
But...
matter of fact, I can't...
was already doing that.
Right. It's hard to look at movies from the 50s, 60s. They're so slow. Yeah, even though I want to be able to appreciate slow things, but you're conditioned by, if you're watching TV and regular stuff, a little bit at least, you are mutated over the last 30 years. What were you going to say? You started to say something, I think. I interrupted there. What's your last thought?
Well, that he was at a higher speed already. That we are not so used to these speed changes. You see that in, for example, these twin brothers dances, how they can move like in a matrix motion, like very fast, and then in reverse, and do all the forwarding, and really as if you're watching the movie, but they're doing it with their own bodies for real.
Right. That's the guy you had a picture with, right? You had your picture taken with one of the twins.
The twin brothers. Yeah, they do. They really move like in what you see in the Matrix.
Yeah.
For real.
Yeah.
And Zappa was already, because he worked with recording, he could do all these speeds and reverse and forwarding that maybe most people were into linear.
Yeah.
And into a certain speed, and now we can go in all directions. We are not only in this one tempo linearity.
Right. And not just one sentimental mood, one theme in a song.
Yes, he's doing the cacophony of the new environment already.
Yeah. As Barry Miles said, he's describing the music comes from the automobile environment of Los Angeles. Now we had a Kim was on earlier. You weren't hearing the show, I don't think. You were sleeping, but she was with her son, and in his car they had a TV. He has a TV screen in his car, relatively new car. But he was being texted by his friends downtown witnessing a riot outside a Trump convention or speech. Now, the text can be heard. So he didn't have to, he's driving, he didn't have to read the text. It would be translating the visual text into audio. So his mother, Kim, and him were listening to the audio keep coming out of this phone, right? Because all these people were texting him. So it just kept talking. So he's driving, he's watching the environment that his car is in, he's processing what's on the TV screen, and he's processing the audio stuff coming in from the texting. What a complex communication experience that is. And it's all normal. Can you imagine your mother sitting in that car, or your grandmother? They would think that a maniac had hijacked reality, and it wasn't even a car. They'd think they were in a spaceship or something. You know, someone with older, slower perceptual habits would just be shocking. And what Kim described, I've never experienced. I don't have a car. I don't have a cell phone. I don't have a TV screen in front of me. Though I did see a guy walk down the street the other day, first time, with these incredibly ugly goggles on his eyes and wrapped around his head, walking along the sidewalk with this, like, platypus protrusion, you know, that animal, the platypus with the big beak. It looked like a fucking beak coming out of his forehead. And he's walking along looking at the data inside the goggles. Or I don't know what he was looking at. That's one of the first times in a long time I thought I saw a weird freak, a weird phenomenon. Okay, so...
And that's why Frank will make his musicians practice so much, because he will get frustrated that they will not do this very complex, very fast.
They couldn't do it. He wanted to hear it, and they wouldn't do it.
He had those compositions in his head, but they were not able to do it because maybe, like Ian said, now is the time we can appreciate what he's doing. And maybe the musicians now have the perception that allows them to perform that.
Yes.
These many changes and these different speeds.
So the article says it was kind of ragged around the edges. Then that thing about kicking off the tempo before giving the downbeat. In the midst of unmotivated tempo changes, unmotivated? That's where it sounded drunk. The fact also... then
how can a tempo change be unmotivated?
Yeah. And when the wazoo was in motion, Zappa failed to indicate precisely where one could be found in the midst of unmotivated tempo changes. Doesn't even make sense. Okay, so then the next paragraph. The fact also remains that Zappa is on to something with his new charts. Oh, the guy sort of saying, there's something else. It's made. Oh, wait a minute. I mixed it up with the other Rolling Stone review. This guy, at least, is seeing more than the Rolling Stone reviewer. The fact also remains that Zappa is on to something with his new charts. Despite their clumsy melodic intervals and unsophisticated harmonic gropings, there's about them a refreshing fusion of jazz and rock. Take the song Calvin for Calvin and his next two hitchhikers. Zappa has worked in some fine, hard-edged brass attacks against a relentless rock pulse. That chart, all arrangements for the Grand Wazoo are by Zappa, is one of the most successful weddings of jazz and rock in the book, in the world, the guy's saying. But he's saying, despite the clumsy melodic intervals and unsophisticated harmonic gropings, they really still have a more pristine perception of sensory experience. They aren't used to the chaos we're used to 30 years later, right? And like you said... it seems that for him it all sounds like chaos. Like he doesn't see the logic. He just... What did he say about the intervals? He called them clumsy melodic intervals.
Yeah. Well, it's not the conventional harmony, the conventional timing, the conventional arrangements. So maybe I think that's the problem. Many people reject Zappa although like McLuhan, he had many other patterns,
yes.
many other different ideas. Because of the complexity, they just don't hear any logic. They just hear a lot of weird noise.
Weird rhythms. Okay, the next song, Big Swifty, is a succession of time changes. From 7/8 to 3/4 to 7/8 to 3/4 to 5/8, then 6/8. One immediate comparison was with the Don Ellis big band amalgam of rock and jazz. He was a pretty big jazz guy back then. But one immediate difference is that when the head has been stated and it's time for improvised choruses, Zappa switches to reliable 4/4. Waiting for some, great improvisation, and Frank goes dumb. But so you got Don Ellis doing these complex changes, or time changes. But one immediate difference that when the head has been stated. What's that? The head. Do you know that term?
The head what?
Just the head. The head has been stated. The opening overture or something. And when the head has been stated and it's time for improvised choruses, Zappa switches to reliable 4/4.
Well, those are the expectations. We were also talking about how somebody wrote about jazz being folk music, and many people saying it's a very sophisticated type of music, but it's actually folk music. But you were fighting on that.
Yeah, the industrial folklore is what it's really about. It's not about agricultural folklore.
But even in jazz, there are some conventions that people...
Yes.
There's the theme, and then there are the solos, the impros.
Right.
Where
so Zappa's going to upset that.
They show... And when these people are expecting these big solos and explorations, he goes back to the...
He goes back to doo-wop.
The 4-beat.
So then the next paragraph is... yeah, go ahead.
He could do everything.
Yes, that's right. He could do everything. Now, it says the next paragraph, a satirical waltz permeates a song called New Brown Clouds, with a section that goes into double time before returning to the slow waltz. There are a lot of gimmicky effects here, but more significantly, there are a lot of awkward passages in the writing. The kind of phrasing that would allow anyone to goof without the audience knowing it.
But he also liked to challenge his musicians.
Yeah.
And sometimes the best musicians that were into jazz and then went to play with Zappa, he will make them play these silly songs and silly
triplets.
Easy, yes, and that was the challenge. For them it was not a challenge to play complex.
Right.
The challenge was to go
simple
to the 4 beats and to the simple harmonies, the conventional type of song. So he's really...
He's altering perception.
Challenging with the complex and with the simple.
Yeah. And so he was a school. People came in and thought, okay, we're going to make music and challenge people out there. But he challenged the musicians. They were in school before they even got to perform. He was schooling them in initiating. So it says here, a lot of gimmicky effects, a lot of awkward passages in the writing, the kind of phrasing that would always allow anyone to goof without the audience knowing it. Then it says there's another lazy feel. Another lazy feel is in the song Penis Dimension, a series of muddy chords before a satirical march takes over. The march-like section is reminiscent of the tongue-in-cheek sound of Kodali in his Harry Janos suite. Maybe you know Kodali, K-O-D-A-L-Y, Kodali? Don't know that? Harry Janos suite. The main difference here is that Zappa calls for a free jazz excursion by tenor sax over the march. So a series of muddy chords before a satirical march takes over. I don't know if I would hear muddy chords. I just hear sounds I liked. He has certain standards. He's probably a very good jazz listener, and so he thinks things are being muddy. I think Zappa was probing sound itself, looking to make different textures, just making new sound. So why not make a chord that sounded muddy? Okay, the march in another song called Low Budget Dog Meat, the march in Low Budget Dog Meat is not so much satirical as it is grotesque, suggesting early Prokofiev. On the other hand, some of its twisting, meandering unison passages conjure up the musical incense of the Mid-East. Then he says, what I'm trying to say is that through the Grand Wazoo, Frank Zappa is hoping to produce a self-portrait as a man for all seasonings. He's a man not for all seasons, but for all seasonings. Now that's the food metaphor in Frank. Frank Zappa is hoping to produce a self-portrait as a man for all seasonings. From the decadence of Kurt Weill to the sensuality of a belly dance. All this over a synthesized rock beat that swings because of its integration with a jazz conception. Even those nonsensical titles are part of the total picture, umbilical cords to the underground that Frank is reluctant to sever. Apparently those titles were not enough to ensure success when the Grand Wazoo made its grand debut September 10th at the Intimate Hollywood Bowl. They were on a bill with The Doors and Tim Buckley. The crowd came in expectations of hearing the Shah of Shock. They're calling him the Shah of Shock, and his inventive mothers playing a familiar brand of rock. The crowd came in expectations of hearing the Shah of Shock and his inventive mothers playing a familiar brand of rock. Some of them laughed when the wazoo began. See? So it's like Payday. When Aya starts talking, people start laughing. It just doesn't seem appropriate. And so they're laughing and they're going, good old Zappa, always being ridiculous. And then they were saying, the audience was thinking, any moment now he'll jump up and say, a 1, a 2, and a 3, and get back to the rock. But the journalist says, no way. All that Frank Zappa did was conduct. And all that his 18 men and 2 chicks did was respond. They sat and read and tried to follow the white stick with cork handle. It was cerebral, antiseptic, and disciplined. Maybe Zappa had the last laugh, but if he did, he was laughing with tears in his eyes. Plenty of his fans got turned off and headed for the exits. Now, they don't know that Zappa didn't care. He didn't care what you thought of his music, so he would not have tears in his eyes, ears. Tears in his, eyes. He would not have tears in his ears. I'll stick with that. No tears in the ears.
But the thing is, he was doing like Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan was playing the role of being a professor, but he was doing, like you said in the last videos of the initiation.
Yes.
He was doing much, much, much more. It's a real type of education. And Frank Zappa was playing the role of the rock star,
yes,
rock musician.
Yeah.
But he was also doing much, much more. Like you said, they're training perception.
Yes.
They're training you
to loosen up your ears.
Yeah, to listen to many different, very complex things, many multi-track, many speeds, many changes.
Yeah, it's almost that Cage was mistaken to emphasize the sounds of the environment too much. Zappa created new environments, brand new environments that appeared to be musical but weren't. Cage sort of worked with intervals and silence and that. And so it just occurs to me that Zappa improved on Cage. So And then it says, so the fans got turned off and headed for the exits. Of course, a mind as sharp as Zappa's usually gets its biggest kicks by turning inward. He not only enjoys last laughs, but gives the impression that he can giggle at the whole weird world of rock, especially the necessary twin evils of promotion and public relations. Then he quotes Zappa. This may be from a press release. I don't know if he said this. But it said Zappa. So here's what he says. Every new group will issue some kind of proclamation explaining the fantastic potential delights resulting from exposure to their unique, material, ingenious... Now, do that right. Every new group will issue some kind of proclamation explaining the fantastic potential delights resulting from exposure to their unique material, ingenious stagecraft, and or their groovy vibes. This is usually accompanied by descriptions of the wonderful freedom shown by the group in performance, and the sort of stuff about how everybody in the group loves what they're doing, and what a nice, wholesome bunch of lads they are. Maybe they're not wholesome. Maybe they're tough and degenerate. But of course, underneath it all, each fellow is exquisitely talented and in possession of a golden heart with a matching soul. I make none of these claims on behalf of the Wazoo. They're not happy. They don't love what they're doing. They're not trying to be free. They're in their mind.
What's your concept, the happiness?
The what? My concept of...
in this interview with Gary Fialka.
Yes. Oh, yes,
Gary
the happiness
Fialka.
from Phineas Wake. Yes, the happiness, the non-happiness or something, right?
Yes.
Yes, I remember that.
They were hypnotized.
Hypnotized.
Hypnotized by happiness.
Yeah, Frank even had to erode that. He had to even to dismantle that. Wasn't useful to people to be happy. So he's saying how they lay out that they're wonderful people. And then he says, such a merchandising proclamation would probably include a paragraph or two about how nobody in the group really cares about money, followed by a carefully worded testimonial regarding the new group's urgent commitment to make the world a better place to live in through their music. So, followed by carefully worded testimony regarding the new group's urgent commitment to make the world a better place to live in through their music, which is sensitive and unutterably deep. Now, that was part of the story of Emperor Cletus Retus Auritus. Remember, there was one kind of 5,000 deep sensitive singers up against another bunch. So he's actually describing what the album is about, and don't know if the album was out at that point when the guy is, he's talking about seeing Zappa in Hollywood on September 10th. I see him a few days later in London. But Zappa, see, he's doing the interview and one has not read the liner notes of the album yet. So he's acting out the album right there. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's performing there. What is it? He is, so what is he trying to tell us about? All art is about, commitment to make a better world, or to be sensitive and unutterably deep, and we don't care about money. What the fuck is Zappa on about? If it's not that.
Yes, what's the message of the medium?
Yeah. And we know that's
what is all this about?
And he's predicting, acting out what Iron would do. Iron did the same.
The continuous continuity of the whole creation.
Yes, the conceptual continuity. So, then the journalist responds to this, and he goes, two ironies come to mind instantly. First, part of Zappa's disdain for promotional proclamations came verbatim from one of Zappa's proclamations issued just prior to the unveiling of the Grand Wazoo. So, do that again. First, part of Zappa's disdain for promotional proclamations came verbatim. Oh, so he is saying it comes from, he notices that Zappa's saying a script. First, part of Zappa's disdain for promotional proclamations came verbatim from one of Zappa's proclamations issued just prior to the unveiling of the Grand Wazoo. Secondly, someone in the group came heretically close. So, he means in the band, the Grand Wazoo, in the orchestra. Secondly, someone in the group came heretically close to showing that he really doesn't care about money, or at least that he had ambivalent feelings about bread. Reed man Charles Owens told me John Mayall had called him to go on the road with his blues rock group. Quote, he offered me $650 per week plus room and board, but I had to turn it down because I'd already promised Frank I would make this tour. So that's an indication that he doesn't care about money. He should have dubbed Frank, maybe, and gone with John Mayall. Then it says, the tour was a strange one from a logistical point of view. Following the bow at the Bowl, the Wazoo flew to Europe for single concerts in Berlin, London, The Hague, and Copenhagen. Is The Hague in Copenhagen?
Yes, because from the first album, We're Only Here for the Money, Zappa starts with this big joke in the time of the hippies, love and peace. We are only here to make them happy. The opposite of I am.
Right.
But I think the real function of art was until now a mystery also for the artists themselves.
Yes.
Because they thought they were doing something, but at the end we see it was all about the completion.
Yes.
And Marshall McLuhan is the one that comes and really explains the function of art.
Yes.
That is training perception, as you said before.
And what Zappa is demonstrating. Now, is The Hague in Copenhagen? Can't remember. The Hague, Hague. Do you know if that's in Denmark? I mean, in Copenhagen?
In the Netherlands.
Yeah. Let's assume it is, because he has here single concerts in Berlin, but he doesn't say Germany. London, but he doesn't say England. Then he goes The Hague, and in Copenhagen. Maybe The Hague is different from Copenhagen. Then he says, then back to the States for a concert in New York and the grand finale in Boston. Zappa, now, he's talking about the touring of the Grand Wazoo. Well, like a month later, after he gets back and being in Europe and playing a few gigs with the Grand Wazoo, he then creates the Petite Wazoo, the little Wazoo, the Petite. And he travels around for a month or so with that. Okay. Zappa seemed to be impressed by the fact that such highly respected studio swingers agreed to make the tour, even though they all knew beforehand that the band was scheduled to self-destruct at a specific time. Quote, right after the show in the dressing room of Boston's Music Hall, September 24th, 1972. And that's just like a week after I saw him in London.
Wow.
What?
You saw the Petite Wazoo or the...
I saw the Grand Wazoo.
Okay.
Big band. So then the article says, I was curious how he managed to contract the musicians whose loyalties matched their talents. Frank says, I called a trombone player I worked with during the recording of the Lumpy Gravy album. So that'd be like 4 years earlier. His name was, and apparently continued, Zappa goes, his name was, and apparently continues to be, Kenny Shorey. Gotta start saying that. Roxy's, this is Roxana, that's her name and continues to be her name. Gotta start using that one. With a rumpled copy of the local 47 Musicians Union directory in one hand and a telephone in the other, Kenny Shorey managed to fill most of the empty chairs by crooning such memorable lines. Now here's what he sang to the prospective members of Zappa's band, or orchestra. Here's the questions. Are you interested? Can you read these charts? Do you have time to rehearse? And the perennial favorite, are you free to travel? So Zappa is considering his life is an opera. And he gets this guy to call these other people.
You could ask the same questions to the Forslings.
Yes. Are you interested? Can you read these? That's a good point. His name was, and apparently...
Can you read the chart?
Can you read the tiny note chart? Do you have time to rehearse? Are you free to travel? So all that's laid out humorously by Frank. Then the journalist says, well, the traveling's over. The first season is history. According to Zappa's manager, Herb Cohen, quote, artistically, it was a success. Those kids in Europe just sat and listened attentively. Financially, well, we broke even, so I'd call that a success too. Then he asks, Zappa's immediate plans? They call for a return to the womb, a new 10-piece Mothers of Invention, a completely different repertoire, says Frank. A completely different repertoire with a concerttour already set up in this country and Canada. But Frank is serious about wazooing it again next summer, and he should. Zappa has proven he can handle large forms. He's no stranger in paradise. Now, he does, though, create the small band, unless the 10-piece Mother's Invention, completely different repertoire, can't be. So, that band probably doesn't get going till 5-6 months later. But don't quote me on that. And he's going to be interrupted by the petite wazoo first. And then it says, so he's no stranger in paradise. He pleased the guys in the band, and let's face it, the sidemen in a big band are the severest critics of any leader. The consensus I got when I talked to them, to Jay Migliore, Mike Altschul, Charles Owens, Kenny Schroyer, and Glenn Ferris was, quote, it's a challenge, it's something different. I thought he was crazy at the outset, but there's a method to his madness. There you have it. The main characteristic of Iandom. We thought Iandom was crazy at the beginning, but now we know there's a method to his sanity. So that's pretty neat. They were nervous about him. You know, they didn't know that much about it, or he went beyond their expectations. Therefore, at first, the mind resists, thinks he's crazy. So that's pretty neat, eh? Good article.
Yes, because like in the case of Marshall McLuhan, the Academy wants him to be just a professor, and they reduce him to the Gutenberg Galaxy, and
right.
They do what he didn't want it to be.
That's right. He did what? Hey, you guys are getting it wrong, he would say.
And most people want to see Zappa as a rock musician.
Yes.
But he's much more than that, and
most people want to see me as
the thing with, I think, that brings the confusion and the rejection.
Yes, most people want to see me as a sex god, but I remain curiously addicted to nerdy activities. Like analyzing the effects of old reviews of Frank Zappa. Hardly sexy, but
yes.
We're not interested in presenting that angle of human activity at this point. Maybe in the future, if it fits into the conceptual continuity, yes, it'll be a sex god. But doesn't seem to be attractive right now. Now, there's this pretty interesting interview that I'm going to read. Now, do you have more ideas you want to say first?
Well, I think, for example, when you go to the Marshall McLuhan Forum and present in like 5 minutes a bunch of quotes, and you claim you're the best McLuhan scholar and you're proving it.
Yeah.
It's not really about showing off, but it's really just this challenging.
Yes.
Like Frank Zappa will challenge his best musicians by making them play dumb music.
Right.
And you're just challenging.
I'm challenging them to be. They want to discuss McLuhan's ideas, and note there's no response. Is that what?
Well, I was looking for the quotes to put on the video.
Yeah, you couldn't find them?
Posted it on your Facebook. Only like 2, but the whole bunch of, I think, how many quotes?
There were 54 quotes.
Yeah, I could not find those.
Well, did you click on the and more? You know, do that, right? You click on more, and then the rest should come out.
I did, but I only found 2.
Uh-oh.
I'm not sure.
I'll have to check that. I think I saved them so that I can send you the quotes, in an attachment.
Yes.
All right, so we'll do that later. So this article, which is a rock magazine, now he's in a jazz magazine, now he's back into a rock magazine, and the newspaper is called Rock, and can't seem to get the date on it. This could be, well, let's see what it says. Maybe this is about the Grand Wazoo. Okay. It says, Frank Zappa, if his friends could hear him now, and friends in quotes. So it looks like it's about Waka Jawaka. It's been a long time since his London stage accident. For the rest of us, life's been going on, but for Frank Zappa, a large proportion of that time has been spent lying in hospital beds and resting in his California home, recovering from the disastrous incident which left him badly injured. Lately, though, he's been writing and playing music. He did the Waka Jawaka album and started a tour with a 20-piece band based on essentially the same ideas as that album. A few weeks ago, he was back in London, an air of weariness and a brace on his leg, the only outward reminders of the rainbow. He talked with not a little bitterness in his voice of his experience in the world of rock and roll to Steve Peacock. The first question dealt with the new band. So, Frank, it begins in mid-sentence. It says, quote, is called, so the new band is called the Mothers of Invention Hot Rats Grand Wazoo for short. It's a 20-piece electric orchestra, and the group is only going to be together for a total of 8 concerts. The Hollywood Bowl, the Oval, I saw him in the Oval, The Hague, Berlin, 2 days in New York, Boston, and back home. Have you decided against having a regular band now? Pretty much, yeah. But that's not true. He does, within a year, have a regular band. And they're around for a couple of years, then he gets other members. So it became more fluid, but a lot of them stayed for many years. So I think he says, the guy says, have you decided against having a regular band now? Pretty much, yeah. I think that of all the unreliable phenomena that exist in the 20th century, the musician may come up in first place as unreliable. So the guy says, unreliable in what way? And he says, just in unreliability. So rather than keep something together to a point where it becomes 100% unreliable, it's better to just put things in small doses and do a variety of things, because I'm interested in exploring a lot of different kinds of music and a lot of different textures. And I see no reason why it should not be possible to put together a 20-piece orchestra for one tour. And then if I feel willing to put myself through the work of putting together another group of a totally different instrumentation for another tour, then I'll do that. Never really saw him ever say that before. Cosmic Awareness described his music back in '69 as playing with different textures, and here he's using that word. Then he says, as a matter of fact, as soon as I get up... What?
Maybe you should play this Cosmic Awareness.
It's no audio.
What the Cosmic Awareness? Oh.
Yeah, this is.
But you have the.
I could read it.
Description?
I could read it. Yes. How do I find
because
that?
Now that we're talking about the mystery landscape confrontation.
Yes.
It would be nice to see what they say.
I think it's in my diaries. Let's just check that. So go over to the diary, the timeline. Go down to, well, just put in Zappa. I can put in textures. Nope, nothing came up. Textures. Oh, but we're not getting the diary content. So I have to go by the date. So go down to 1970. Okay, looks like this could be it. Listen to this. So on Zappa's birthday, December 21st, 1969, in Seattle, I asked Cosmic Awareness, who was coming through Dave Worster, who was in a deep trance. I go, would awareness comment on the musical ideas of Frank Zappa? And it says, Dave Worster, in brackets, in trance while lying on a couch. Then, here's what Worster's mouth said. This awareness indicates that this entity is one who moves and collects response from many areas. Moves and collects. And that's about checking out all kinds of scenes. That's what he did. That these become a kaleidoscope to be embroidered for the texture of sound. It's the texture of sound. That these become a kaleidoscope to be embroidered for the texture of sound. Even back then, I had known Zappa was doing that. I thought this was a beautiful description. I even read it to Dave Wally, did the first biography of Zappa, and he was impressed. Then it says, this awareness indicates that each of these areas that have become a kaleidoscope. This awareness indicates that each of these then become an entrance from a two-dimensional system into many other areas of visualization. That's exactly the right word, visualization, because Zappa was into drawing the music. When he made his charts, or whatever you call this, writing of musical notes, he would decorate it, the visualization of it. So what do you think of that?
Wow.
Here's so then I asked, back then you would ask about past lives, so I said, was this entity a famous musician in a previous life? Worster and awareness say, this awareness indicates this is negative, that this entity's previous life action is one involved with a stone and a glass and mosaics, this in areas of North Africa, that this entity also was an architect involving certain mosques. And if that's true, it reflects what he did in this life, working with mosaics, kaleidoscopes, textures, and being an architect. So that's a very interesting statement. So listen to this. Would awareness comment on the ideas of Marsh McLuhan and the significance of their application? It responds, this awareness indicates that this entity, in breaking through strands of certain gauges and screens, has seen a view of which becomes of itself an action. And in understanding that each of the gauges, a screen that is placed before the real action, also determines the extent to which entities may approach the real action before breaking through these screens and gauges. This awareness indicates in this manner the various apparatus, organization, mechanical, or structured concepts may be considered as gauges and screens before the real action. You laughing?
No.
Yeah.
It was my headphones.
Okay. This awareness indicates in this manner the various apparatus, organization, mechanical, or structured concepts may be considered as gauges and screens before the real action. That which is seen in relation to each of these gauges or screens is the limitation which one may approach the real action. Hence, quote, the medium is the message, unquote, is an indication of the limitation to which entities may move through these filters and colorations. Indication of the limitation. That's true. The medium distorts what you're perceiving. So, you like that?
Yes, but then the medium of the non-physical is the only one that doesn't distort, but sort of cleans everything up.
Yeah, I think that's true. Not sure, but I think so. So there's your little treat. Cosmic awareness, almost 50 years ago. Okay, back to the article. I wonder if I ask any more Zappa after that. I may have. Let's see if I put it in.
Do you know if Frank Zappa ever made comments about this Francesco Zappa?
We have to look at the interviews. He makes comments in the book Them or Us. What
has he thought about that whole thing? Did he just thought it was an ancestor, or? No,
it was, I don't know if he was a relative. He had the same name. I can't remember what Frank said about that. And he's in the Dictionary of Musicians. But we had the theory that he is Francesco Zappa. But Ion says that Frank wasn't doing parallel worlding and that stuff, so It's not likely. But he writes about them very interestingly, humorously in the book Them or Us. After maybe we went through Them or Us, so maybe I didn't read it. I didn't read enough about Francesco. Okay, so we were just spring chickens back then. We knew nothing.
Challenging.
Yes, we knew nothing back then. We didn't
to make people turn on their imaginations and start expanding the possibilities.
Start talking. Turn on their mouth, too. Yes. Okay, so he says, as a matter of fact, as soon as I get off the road after this tour, that's exactly what I'll do, put together another group. We have a tour lined up for the United States and Canada at the end of October. The journalist says, have you any idea yet what that will be like? He says, the main thing in it will be that I'm going to be playing a lot of guitar, and it's possible that it may have some vocals. I may do some vocals with it and probably have another vocalist, probably some brass rhythm section, and there's another man who plays an unusual instrument who I haven't contracted yet. Then they say, he says this, the journalist says, you're still finding it necessary or satisfying to go out on the road and play? Because you must be in a position now where you don't have to. Frank says, not necessarily. I think the only time you don't have to go out on the road is when you're in the position of a large phenomenon like the Beatles or the Stones, where you sell large, frightening numbers of records automatically. That's a mediacology statement, frightening numbers of records. I would rather face an audience and let them see what I'm doing and let them hear what I'm saying exactly than deal with them second or third hand, conversing to them through the print media or something like that. Certainly I enjoy playing music, and a tour is a good way to keep people informed of what you're doing. And if they like what you do, then, of course, they'll follow it up with records. You wouldn't, then the journalist says, you wouldn't feel able to get to them sufficiently closely. You would, just a minute. Well, you wouldn't feel it. Don't know what this question is, really. You wouldn't feel able to get to them sufficiently closely with just records? Oh, okay. The media would be records. Not really, because I've got so much stuff all ready to release now that I can't put out, because you've got to wait 3 or 4 months between albums, because the company who's distributing your stuff say they don't get a chance to recoup their money if you do it in less time than a 4-month gap. In fact, we just had a jam session all night, I guess about a month ago. Jean-Luc Ponty happened to be in town, and so did George Duke and a number of other West Coast jazzmen. So we had a jam session in the mix room upstairs in a recording studio in Los Angeles. It was unusual because the only thing that was being picked up by a microphone was the drums, and everything else was being plugged directly into the board through transducers. So consequently, everyone except the drummer was standing around the console, and they could hear themselves perfectly at high volume in quad. No charts. Nobody even said, we'll play this or that. We just turned the tape recorder on and started cranking away. We recorded all different combinations of instruments from 7 in the evening to 7 in the morning. And I can't release it because I already have another album in the can that's set for release in 3 weeks' time in the States. And then we're doing some live recording over here, and I won't be able to put that out until it doesn't finish that sentence. And this is in England. And whenever you put an album out, people assume that I'm totally committed to that at the time, that that's my new direction or something. I may have been doing 11 different things simultaneously at the time the album was made, but they don't get to find out about that until the release schedule catches up. I guess they can read the liner notes or whatever. After the Rainbow accident, did you want to keep those mothers together, or were you going to disband them anyway? I didn't have much choice in the matter. I couldn't work, so I couldn't employ them. What could I offer them if we couldn't go out on the road? But even before that last tour, we were getting into some kind of recording contract with Mark and Howard so that they could do their own album. We were getting into some kind of recording contract with Mark and Howard, those are the two turtles, so that they could do their own album. However, they chose not to mention the fact that we, Zappa and manager Herbert Cohen, fought to get them out of their previous recording contract. The journalist says, really? And then they put you down in their press interviews? Well, I would imagine that that's just the beginning of it, and that there'll probably be a lot more of that shit. But I find that distinctly unethical, because what happened when we got back to Los Angeles was that I started figuring out ways that I could get the guy some money, because our tour was cut short, and we didn't do about 6 jobs. And also the insurance money on our equipment that got burned in Montreux only got settled last week. And they haven't given us the check yet, but we're agreed on an amount. So Frank continues. So while I was away in Los Angeles, I tried to find a way to give them some bread, and I happened to have a tape of a concert we did just prior to the European tour. So I decided to release that as an album, and I managed to work a deal where I got each member of the group an advance payment of $2,000, which is way in excess of what they would have gotten if I'd just done it under normal circumstances. I find no mention of that in their press releases. And another thing they've been garbling about in some of the papers in Los Angeles is that I didn't call them up or go to see them or anything. Shit, I'm sitting up in my house in a wheelchair with my leg up in the air, and they never bother to come over and see me either. Turning the page. So he's talking about the former mothers of invention. I think the attitude they've shown so far has been strictly commercial. It seems to happen, so then the journalist says, it seems to happen that people who work with you and leave end up bad-mouthing you in the papers. Zappa goes, yep. A lot of people automatically assume that because somebody says something like that, it must be true. And not once for any article. What the heck is anybody? Okay. So they bad-mouth them when they leave them. He goes, yep, a lot of people automatically assume that because somebody says something like that, it must be true. And not once for any article that says something like that has anybody bothered to call me or the office to corroborate anything that was said. I guess if you took the combined work of all the interviews where people have said things like that and sat down with all the receipts and all the contracts, I think you'd find out that all of them were liars. And that the sole reason for people saying something like that was just a minute. And that the sole reason for people saying something like that was for publicity purposes. Because if you say something that is sensational, you wind up getting more press. So one guy says he's really hot shit, and the next guy reads it and says, look, they did over there, and it worked for them. Let's do it. And then the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It does work. So he's saying that, what? Work in the States, and are you there? Did you get disconnected? Uh-oh. I think her phone got disconnected. Yeah. And that happened. Only 3 minutes ago. Okay.
Ooh. Ooh.
I was eating.
Yeah, me too. We need pork.
So that was an excerpt from some concert. I don't have a title for it, so I don't know what that was or when or what. But it's a nice interval. Now, you were coming on. You wanted to say something? You were going to say something.
Yes, Frank Zappa said you can do very serious stuff without being serious.
Yeah.
And I think this is the whole point of this. There is a scientist of the Michigan Institute of Technology that came up with a mathematical model of consciousness. And he says, like, for a specific space, you have specific actions and some algorithms that are the experiences you can have in a specific world. So you have these specific probabilities of experiences and reactions. Like he came up with this algorithm, with this mathematical model of consciousness. But there are some people that somehow can go out of these possibilities of these programs, the glitch in the programs. And those are the artists like Frank Zappa or people who can make these unusual patterns and are brave enough to go out in the public and talk about them.
Right. And what's the institute you were talking about?
The Michigan Institute of Technology.
Oh, okay. I'm just checking. We have somebody. Who's this? I'm going to unmute them.
Yeah.
Muted, unmuted. Who's that? You waved.
His name is...
No, I'm talking to someone on the phone here.
No, I'm just saying the guy that came with this...
mathematics of consciousness.
Yes. Because he says most people have... for a specific experience, there is a set of reactions you can have, like programs.
Yeah.
And this is where we are at now, trying to understand consciousness.
Yes, which is the object in the William Irwin Thompson chart that you put in the latest video, or the video before the latest. That's the self-consciousness becomes an object of analysis, because we're more than consciousness now. That's the...
Yes, and like you said, what is really controlling?
Right.
How much is really us? How much is this interaction with the non-physical?
How much is something external?
Yes, we don't really know how this really works. What is art? What is the medium and the message? Really.
Right.
But it all seems to point out that all creations were about being aware of the non-physical and talking back to...
Yeah, the non-medium. Being aware of the non-medium. You're in a medium, you're surrounded, you're hypnotized, you're happily hypnotized, and awareness is seeing through it, not inside it.
Yes. The medium is the music.
Yes. That's our numbness today. William Irwin Thompson says we live entirely by music, same idea as McLuhan, and the victim is the mind.
Right.
So let me just... So I'm not going to read it, but he's complaining about the Turtles, Mark and Howard, and how when they leave his band, they go out and start criticizing Frank. And he says that happens all the time with him. And so then the journalist says, really? They did that? And then they put you down in their press interviews? Oh, yeah, he did a big effort to change the contracts. Getting some kind of recording contract so they could do their own album. He did all that for them, and then they put him down in interviews. Now, did you hear? I said something about. Oh yeah, we did the Peter Zosky. They said coffee made Frank's music weird. Okay, so when they ask him, and then they put you down in the interviews after you did all that. Well, I would imagine that that's just the beginning of it, and that there'll probably be a lot more of that shit. But I find that distinctly unethical, because what happened when we got back to Los Angeles was that I started figuring out ways that I could get the guys some money, because our tour was cut short, and we didn't do about 6 jobs. And also the insurance money on our equipment that got burned in Montreux only got settled last week. They haven't given us a check yet, but we've agreed on an amount. So while I was in Los Angeles, I tried to find a way to give them some bread, and I happened to have a tape of a concert we did just prior to the European tour, so I decided to release that as an album, and I managed to work a deal where I got each member of the group an advance payment of $2,000, which is way in excess of what they would have gotten if I'd just done it under normal circumstances. I find no mention of that in their press releases. And another thing they've been garbling about in some of the papers in Los Angeles is that I didn't call them up or go to see them or anything. Shit, I'm sitting up in my house in a wheelchair with my leg up in the air. And they never bothered to come over and see me either. I think the attitude they've shown so far has been strictly commercial. I think I read this before, but it's okay. Then the journalist says, it seems to happen that people who work with you and leave end up bad-mouthing you in the papers. He goes, yep. Now, you didn't hear me say this stuff, right?
Mm-mm.
You didn't hear it?
No.
So they end up bad-mouthing him. And he goes, yep. A lot of people automatically assume that because somebody says something like that, it must be true. And not once for any article that says something like that, something negative about Frank, has anybody bothered to call me or the office to corroborate anything that was said. I guess if you took the combined work of all the interviews where people have said things like that and sat down with all the receipts and all the contracts, I think you'd find out that all of them were liars, and that the sole reason for people saying something like that was for publicity purposes. Because if you say something that is sensational, you wind up getting more press. So one guy says he's really hot shit, and the next guy reads it and says, look, they did it over there, and it worked for them, let us do it. And then the next one, and the next one, and so on. It does work. So he's saying, so one guy says he's really hot shit, next guy reads it and says, look, they did it over there, and it worked for them, let us do it. So they start bragging about themselves. And then the next one, and so on. But it does work. He says, he managed Captain Beefheart in the fall of 69. Now he's talking about, so I think he's complaining about Beefheart, who, when I met with Beefheart in 71, summer of 71, he was knocking Frank a bit. So this is 72 or so. So, okay, but he managed Beefheart for a short while in fall of 69, after he broke up the Mother's Invention, which happened on the weekend of Woodstock. So he says, I spent some time with Captain Beefheart when he was over in England. And from them, I got more of a general anti-Zappa feeling than any specific comments. Oh, no, sorry, the journalist is saying this. I spent some time with Captain Beefheart when he was over here, and from Zappa, Beefheart and his band, I got more of a general anti-Zappa feeling than any specific comments. Yes, Beefheart did the same thing with me. And he says, now I never heard him address this, I don't think, address Beefheart's complaints. Well, yes, and I've seen some of those specific complaints, and I can't see there's really any foundation for what they say, let alone what they do. It seems peculiar that they forget all the things that our office did to make things easier for them, to help them get started. Like we've got receipts for pumping their cesspool. They actually pumped their home, where they were, their cesspool, and they also pay for a tree surgeon for his house. Beefheart demanded the surgeon to be protected. Just little things down the line that would go wrong, and they'd call up and we'd fix it for them. It's just such a weird attitude. If we'd used the Motown attitude to our acts, none of this would have ever occurred, because when you sign with the label, you also get locked into a management thing, which is also controlled by the office. So I guess the Motown contracts aren't too cool. If we'd used the Motown attitude to our acts, none of this would have ever occurred, because when you sign with the label, you also get locked into a management thing, which is also controlled by the office. But I don't like the idea of doing that. Consequently, the only artist we ever had under contract that I produced was Wildman Fisher, and the reason for that was that nobody else would touch him. We hoped that we could get him some work in order for him to promote his album, and when he wanted to have his contract back, Herbie Cohen just handed it to him. Does the whole thing hurt you very much? So what do you predict he's going to say? Does these kind of things hurt his feelings? What do you predict his answer will be?
Yes, well, he like you, he was challenging everybody.
Yeah.
And this always creates resentfulness.
Resentfulness, yeah.
And instead of gratefulness, you are forcing people to expand at all levels, not only the ideas, but
you know that part that's resentful. I think of that as the God in each person that's resenting you. You had, like Ion said this recently, when we release a Cold Fusion, people are going to say, you have the guts, the gall to change my world? You're going to make my oil world, my cars obsolete? That's outrageous. So people get mad.
Yes, that's the story of the Jews wanted to be slaves.
Yes.
They didn't want to have the responsibility.
Yeah, they get free, then they go right back and get another pharaoh.
Power away. Yes, Pharaoh, you program. You do the pyramids with Bob. All this.
Yeah, now, what were we just saying, though? So, just the first thought that... they're gods. So they resent... in the end, gods can't affect each other. So they get all mixed up, and then they appear to be affected. They go, oh, shit, man, I didn't really get affected, but it looks like I got affected. My God self objects to that. That's what I think is going on here. Gods do not want to feel they were influenced, because they know you can't influence anybody, supposedly. But I might correct me.
That's the tragedy. Ion always said if you help somebody instead of gratefulness, it's going to cause this...
resentment. Yes, he's always said that. And that's good that he says that. I don't know if any wisdom source emphasizes that very much. I don't think so. They're always telling you to be good or to help people. They forget to add, but after you've helped people for a while, they're going to resent it. That's not said. Your parents don't tell you that.
Help is not giving the power back, but telling you, I am more than you. Right.
Look at all your boyfriends, all that you gave them, and they all resent you because you gave it to them. That's just a joke, folks. I know nothing about her love life. Yes. So, it'd be good.
It's starting with Moses. I mean,
yeah.
What a jerk.
Yeah. No wonder he didn't. He knew he didn't deserve the promised land. He fucked up, man. Really fucked up. He basically committed suicide. But I was just saying, if you told young kids these facts, these emotional facts, would it upset their childhood? The adults keep this stuff away from kids. They don't tell them, look, you want to be a nice person. But if you're too nice, they'll start to get pissed off at you. They don't say that. But it'd be interesting if cultures did teach that. What would that clarity, that realism do to the fantasy of childhood?
Well, I suppose people will be more in their power and
they'll be able to take it. Yeah, they would. You're saying that might put
their own world,
right? Which is what you did. You actually are an exemplar of that. You're like 5 years old and refused to listen to anything the teacher said, asked to leave the room, and went off and did your own stuff. Yeah, they thought you were a retard. She's mentally unstable, man. She won't listen to the teacher. You were the original autistic kid, but you didn't appear autistic.
Nowadays, I would have gotten a lot of medication.
What, they did? They put you on medication?
No. At the time, that was not the trend. But
lucky.
Nowadays, yeah.
Yes, now they put you on medication, but the what was I going to say? That if you you're not autistic. You weren't doing all the crazy stuff autistic kids do to assert their autonomy. You just said, I'm not going to be around for the next 2 hours. I'm going to go over to the Frida Kahlo's home and rummage around in her garden. Then I'm going to go to a church. I like sitting in a church. So, okay, back to Frank. So he's saying Motown would be a drag. And, does the whole thing hurt you very much? This is an interview. I don't think I ever read it. Long forgotten, but it's asking questions that I don't think anybody else has ever asked this situation. Does the whole thing hurt you very much? Frank says, it depends on the relationship I had with the artist prior to the press releases that they put out. I felt especially uncomfortable. Well, I guess it was just painful in the cases of Beefheart and Mark and Howard. I just felt that was extremely low behavior. So he did have hurt feelings. In the case of Beefheart, I just don't understand it because he's so erratic that he's likely to say something like that and then the next day turn around and say the opposite. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened, and he just kept on saying he didn't go erratic and say the opposite. He kept on saying one thing. That was different. I remember. Now, I heard Beefheart complain about Frank. He said, Frank's not an artist. He's just a great engineer. That's what he said, something like that. But, and it's true that Beefheart, would be erratic. So I see Frank was pretty mature in dealing with it. He just carried on, did his stuff. Then he says that he thinks that Beefheart probably discovered the more he said it, meaning putting down Frank, the more press coverage he got. Then the guy says, the journalist says, if I could change the subject for a moment, can I ask you how long you were laid up after the Rainbow? After he got knocked off in December, I think it's December 10th or 11th, 1971. I was a month in the Harley Street Clinic. That's where all the doctors are, right? Harley Street. And then I had about another 3 months in Los Angeles, pretty much incapacitated. And I then gradually started improving from there. So he was laid up through December, January, February, March. So in April 71, I go and visit the United States. When I entered the States, Frank started perking up. I'm going to take credit for that. My Ophanel presence walked into the country, and Frank, being an avant-garde artist, picked up on it. Because, it was, I know exactly what I was doing in December 71 and January, February, March. So he's talking about 4 months. Then he said, he started improving from there. I've had this brace on my leg for about 2 months. And before that, I had a cast on, sitting in a wheelchair. The leg's not healing very fast, but it is healing now at last. I had a whole assortment of injuries, and it bugged me a little bit to see the way it was handled in the press, a kind of semi-humorous treatment. Here in London and also in the States, yo ho ho, he fell in the orchestra pit, or maybe it's meant ho ho ho, he fell in the orchestra pit. You see, when you go around challenging people, they fucking get pissed off. And they wait for you to get injured. They wait for them to express their resentment. What do you think of that?
Well, in a way, he created all this contrast.
Yes. Yeah.
To change the situation. I mean, he had a pause, and then he restructured. The big wazoo.
Yeah, the big zookeeper. What zoo?
He was waiting for new
inspiration
from Bob.
New what? New what?
Or from the physical commands.
Commands. That's right. Yes, he waited. So now we wait a minute. Oh, no. I'm wrong. This is going 72. I did not enter the United States in April 72. No. I actually didn't. After I was there in 70. We'll have a reverse interpretation. When I decided not to go back to the States for a while, I was there in November 71, and a couple weeks later he gets injured. And I know my direction is not to be in the States for the next couple of years. And so because I didn't go to the States, he got injured. My protection I had done around him had been removed. Not intentionally, but I didn't know having that effect on him. But as soon as I withdrew from participating with the United States in late November 71, he fucking got hurt. And I don't go back to the States. Oh, wait a minute. Geez, I'm all fucked up. I go back to the States in July 72 for the Newport. The first time the Newport Jazz Festival is in New York City. That's in July 72. So I do go to the States But there's no interaction with Zappa. I'm interacting with Sun Ra, Pharoah Sanders, all kinds of jazz-related guys. Even met Ornette Coleman then. So I did go in, but I didn't pay any attention to Frank. Usually if I went to the States, I went and made an attempt to connect with Frank. But he'd already hurt himself. So we now have to reverse the scenario. He started to get better when I went to New York in 72. That's what we're saying here now. So all kinds of different ways to look at this. I'm sorry I wasted your time even bringing up the topic. But he does say, well, the journalist says they're laughing at him. I mean, Frank says they're laughing at me. I fell in the orchestra pit, and then the journalist says, well, I'm sure that wasn't intended. And Frank says, maybe I was feeling a little crazy and oversensitive in that hospital. I had a broken rib. I got a broken shin, tibia. I had a giant hole. What? Tibia.
It was really bad.
Yes, listen to this. I had a giant hole in the back of my head. The side of my face got mashed in. And for the first 2.5 or 3 weeks in the hospital, I couldn't move my hands, and I didn't know whether I had any brain damage or what. Wow, I've never seen that kind of detail said. Maybe it's in this book, but that's incredible. I couldn't even hold a guitar up by the time I left the place. It was too heavy for me. Then the journalist says, but now it's just the leg? Yeah, just the leg. Did you start writing soon after you got back to L.A.? Oh, yeah, I wrote a whole bunch of stuff as soon as I was able to sit at a table. And the journalist says, are you still planning on Billy the Mountain as the next film? Zappa says, well, I was planning to do that with Mark and Howard, so I'm going to have to shelve that until I can come up with a new way to package it. And I'd rather not discuss the next one until I've made a deal for it. It'll be a feature film and not a cartoon, though. Then the guy says, do you see filmmaking now as important as music? So there's a good question, but before we go into that, I want to go back. He had a broken rib, broken shin, giant hole in the back of his head, the side of his face got smashed in, and he couldn't move his hands, and he didn't know what kind of brain damage he had, and he couldn't hold anything up. Pretty painful time, December, January, February, March 72. What's going on in the world then?
Yes, because he could not even play. That's
right. But it's lucky he didn't.
Horrible. And then everybody was making fun of him and
saying he deserved it.
Complaining.
Yeah. Well, Dave Wally, who wrote the book, he and Zappa had an argument just a few months before December 71. And when it happened, Dave said, Frank got his karma. And Dave Wally thought that Frank deserved it because he treated Dave badly, Dave thought. Dave's no longer with us, so I can say that. Or I'm no longer with him. I went into another world called Maui, so nobody can get to me here. Let's see. In 72, you're going to lead into Watergate. This is when the United States cracks up. Watergate happens in, I think, May 72. May Brussels writes an article in August 72. And then all bets are off about anybody believing the United States White House anymore after that. So it was a bad year for the United States. And John Lennon was running around, and he might have been getting more coverage than Zappa at that point, even though they were sort of acquaintances. So I can remember some of the details of 72. Okay, so do you see filmmaking now as important as music? What do you predict he's going to say?
Yes.
Okay. He says, I see that as just another thing I do. I'd certainly like to do it. It gives you a slightly different advantage because you can use things like close-up that you can't do in a concert. Build up a little more character that way. I'd say the next film I do won't be near the standard idea of a rock and roll movie based on the exploits of a certain fixed group. It'll probably be a little more into being professional actors and with a slightly different premise to work from. I'm about finished with investing large amounts of my time in the development of other people so that they can do press interviews and rip me off. I'm about finished with investing large amounts of my time in the development of other people so that they can do press interviews and rip me off. The guy says, the journalist says, this is the unreliability of musicians you were talking about. Would actors be any better? Frank says, I guess not, but seeing as I haven't had any actors do bad press releases about me yet, I'll explore that field. As soon as I find out I have trouble with actors, then it's cartoons all the way. Then the journalist says, you seem to be very pissed off this time around, disillusioned and a bit down. Frank says, well, I'm tired, to tell you the honest-to-God truth. Got a bit of the jet lag, but something like that would tend to change your attitude towards people in general, musicians in particular, and also audiences, by the way. You just have to view them as a completely different phenomenon. As I told one guy at the press conference, something like this shows you who your friends are, if you ever had any. So the journalist says, so whatever you do now, it'll be for yourself? Well, to be more specific about it, I just won't be doing some of the things that were normally expected of me before. In the way of patronage and so on? Right. I've had it about up to the ceiling, or maybe up to 3 floors above of that sort of activity. Are you carrying on with your straight bizarre record company? Yes, we are. But as far as actually producing records for people myself, that's going to be severely limited because I just don't like the idea of the personal aggravation of getting the playback from it. Don't like the idea of the personal aggravation of getting the playback from it. So my involvement in the record company will probably be to the extent of approving or disapproving of what's available to sign. And I'll turn the actual production over to some other people. That's what I'd like to find right now, is some competent producers who know what to do with people of unusual abilities. There's a lot of guys that can go out and make a straight, slick record. But what if they had to deal with Alice Cooper in the early stage? Then the interviewer says, going back to that Beefheart thing, the one specific charge they did make, going back to that Beefheart thing, the one specific charge they did make was that you didn't create. You just take things and put them together. See, and McLuhan is writing in here and there, but especially a letter to Playboy, that collage is the only art form possible. If you want to be a half-relevant artist, you've got to do collage. So that's what Frank's doing. So he's not
do the Finnegan's Wake.
yeah, like Finnegan's Wake, and so Zappa, of course, he's being original, but the general lack of perception and detail of what he's doing, they think he's just ripping people off, but he's not.
I think, in a way, he could see that all that is happening is part of the same big creation.
Yeah.
The big note.
Yes.
And as you said, he was into producing and promoting people with unusual abilities that will produce unusual artwork.
Yeah.
Or unusual music. Why would that be? For example, the groupies. The
groupie papers.
And the groupie band he had.
The GTOs.
They were not good musicians.
No.
But he thought it was important for women to somehow express themselves.
Yeah.
And take this power back and be more than just a groupie.
Right.
And I think that's the real resentment. That he sort of got disappointed that people were really into that for the money, not for the expression, not for the art.
Not for the communication of something new. They weren't into exploring.
Yes, and I think he actually did a lot for his musicians. He paid the rehearsals.
He also, when the band wasn't touring, he played their when they weren't touring, he paid for their unemployment or give them money, you know.
Yes, and he did as much as he could out of respect for that artist.
Yes.
And it was a big disappointment for him when they didn't saw that.
Yeah.
They just thought they were used by Zappa, and they thought he was not giving them enough credit or enough payment. But I think he he was fair.
Fair, yes. Fair. But okay, so Beefheart says, he said that same thing to me, which would be like 6 months before this interview. He says, no, wait a minute. When is this interview? November 72. So Beefheart said it a year and a quarter before that, in June, July 71. So Beefheart said he's just a good engineer. He's not creative, original. You just take things and put them together. So Zappa says, yeah. Is that to imply that Beefheart's music is 100% pristine and comes from no point of origin? Or is that to say that anyone listening to Beefheart's music is befuddled to the point where they can't trace his sources? Because I certainly know where it comes from, but I wouldn't tell anybody for fear of embarrassing the dear captain. I mean, Beefheart, everybody thought, he was Howling Wolf. I think it was Howling Wolf. He got a lot of it out of the blues records that he and Frank listened to when they were in high school, while eating buns from Captain Beefheart's father's bun bread truck. So, okay, so they're saying he didn't take things. Is that to imply that Beefheart's music is 100% pristine and comes from no point of origin? Or is that to say that anyone listening to Beefheart's music is befuddled to the point where they can't trace his sources? Because I certainly know where it comes from, but I wouldn't tell anybody for fear of embarrassing the dear captain. I don't know what one is supposed to say about taking things from other people and molding them into something of one's own, but I'll tell you exactly what I take from other people, and it's not like taking it either, because in all the groups that I've had, the personalities of the individual musicians I felt were important enough to build into the pieces they were performing. I'll read that again. And it's not like taking it either, because in all the groups that I've had, the personalities of the individual musicians I felt were important enough to build it into the pieces they were performing. When a person is working on the road a certain number of months out of the year, and they have to play a set repertoire in order to keep some sort of program and to ensure some standard of quality for the shows that you have to do night after night, it's better if the people who are performing it have a chance to have something they can identify with. That seems logical. That seems logical. It has to me all along anyway. And what I would do was, when I wrote for the group, I'd take what you might call the folklore of the group and transmute that into musical terms so that the people playing the music got the chance to play something that represented them as much as me. Unfortunately, some people didn't like the way I saw them or what I recognized as their folklore contribution. And other people just didn't like the idea of performing, period. They'd say we were going on the road too much. And then other people felt we weren't going enough, because if you don't go on the road, you don't get paid. In the case of the Old Mother's Invention, at the point that they broke up, I was in a very embarrassing situation, because in order to tell the whole truth about it, I would have had to say some awfully bad things about them, about their musical ability, their attitude, their reliability. It was at a point where I knew they had to get together other ensembles, and I didn't want to do any bad press that might encumber them in their new career, whatever it was. So he knew they had to form other bands, so he wasn't going to say anything negative. It was at a point where I knew they had to get together other ensembles, and I didn't want to do any bad press that might encumber them in their new career, whatever it was. But to tell you their attitude, what's this?
I would like just to say something.
Yeah.
Before you go on. Because he's talking about the folklore, and we were talking last week about page 64 of Counterblast.
Yes.
That's also.
You got that page memorized. Good.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, because I was really impressed how much you can see in this one page.
How much I could see in that one page? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's really impressive.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I accept the compliment. Don't you fuck up and go out and do some press interviews and say I'm a dummy.
Yes, but in a way, Frank Zappa could see that too. This
Yes.
This type of anthropology, the folklore.
Here he's saying it's not all about him. I've never read this. I don't think I read this back then. It's it's in that year, 72, when I wasn't seeing Frank. So I somehow got the magazines later or something and wasn't reading up on him that year. That's why he was unprotected. But he's saying that the folklore, in his case, was the people in the band, their own eccentricities. And he felt that, okay, I'll put them in it.
That's another idea I've only heard from you, that the band is an environment.
Yes.
And
he did that. He regarded that. And the environment would change as he got different band members. And then he would make the music adapt to the personalities. And he said that later, it was hard for him to do the old 50s doo-wop music he liked because the younger kids didn't have that experience. They didn't know how to do it, or they didn't know how to bring that old environment back. It was hard to find him. He eventually get someone or two, but yeah, he was doing the decade dance. Look at it that way. I think that's why I called it.
Yes, and like McLuhan writes, remote folklore, remote societies are being extracted from their matrix and enlarged by microscopic vision.
Yeah, that is cultures are business. The Android meme was allowing any part of human activity to be exploited and turned into a museum or some commercial enterprise.
And the vivisective inspection of all modes of our own inner, outer, individual social lives make us acutely sensitive to all intercultural and intermediate experience. It's like, that's a translation of this.
That's a what?
Frank Zappa's big wazoo bands.
Is this?
It's
what you just read?
Translation of page.
Yeah, a zoo. What zoo? Now he called he put out an album years later of those mothers playing in different concerts in the late 60s, and he called it Playground Psychotics. So this disillusionment was always sneaky in there. And he's then talking about himself as the Emperor Cletus Aurelius, and he's the Grand Wazoo, but he says, what zoo is he keeping? That's the question. He says, I've got this certain kind of repertory group that can do all kinds of different stuff, and it's a zoo to other people, but it becomes a zoo to him because they aren't appreciative of him. So that happens. That title comes after he's disillusioned with these people. So he's actually talking about his own experience. The Grand Wazoo. What zoo? What zoo was he grand over?
Yes, he saw the art form is not only the actual music.
Right. It's not limited to the
environment
sound.
He's creating, and that's why he did try to portray that in the 200 Motels.
Yes. Yeah. And remember, McLuhan, right there in Counterblast, very near page 64, I think, he says that he calls rock and roll teenage music is not music, it's an environment. So McLuhan saw the whole rock youth music culture was an environment, and Frank saw that too. He used to talk about the styles of music would depend on the kind of drugs that people were using. That those early, some of the early heavy music of the early 70s is dull to me, and that's when people were on Quaaludes, which made people apparently dull.
Mm.
Are they on a drug today? Is there even a musical mood anymore?
Yes, there are many.
Yeah, many. But no dominant one. Or do you know of one?
A lot of chemistry, very dangerous stuff.
Well, you mean there are some data pads? That stuff?
Well, I'm not sure exactly, but 2 weeks ago I was in a club and they had a table with information of all the different types of drugs and the damages you can achieve.
the different drugs and did you say panics?
No, damage.
Damage. Oh, they help you. Do they sell the drugs?
Yeah, they were just informing the young people, don't do this because this is really awful.
Well, that's pretty good, but it showed you the different variety of drugs, right?
Yeah, they had just flyers with information of all the different type of things that I never heard about. I was just looking at that table with all these weird names of substances people are engaging.
So that's why you're saying that the chemistry is dangerous. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to this. So he doesn't want to tell the truth about some of these guys who ruined their new careers with their new bands. Then he says, but to tell you their attitude at that point now, so he's going to sort of tell a bit what he didn't say. They were receiving $250 per week guaranteed, whether they worked or not, and had been for a couple of years. And that was a burden I could not bear anymore, because the money we were getting in from concerts was just not enough. At the time we broke up, I felt that at rehearsals they slopped through the music, taking no interest in refining their technique or expanding musically to new horizons. And that may be the end of the interview. Yeah.
Well, I think all the musicians that work with Frank Zappa at some point did so that he created a great environment for them to develop their abilities the most and play with wonderful people.
Yeah.
And just to say I played with Frank Zappa was already
good.
Enough for real. The proof you are good enough to do anything else.
That's right.
So I think many actually used that, even though at some point they were saying Frank was stealing their ideas or whatever.
Yeah, so the title, and this is an article by Steve Peacock, just for the record. The title is Now We Know What It Means. Frank Zappa, if his friends, and friends is in quotes, could hear him now. If his friends could hear him now. So it's an interview where he talks about the grievances of the previous, say, 7 years, or at least the last couple of years. So that's interesting. Okay, so that's another part of Frank's being that we've revealed.
Yes, we're doing the anthropology.
Yes, we're studying the folklore of Frankdom.
Art form, culture.
Frank is our business. Frank Zappa is our business. Okay, now they have a picture. What's it say? There's a picture of Frank, and it says, Frank Zappa is back on the road with yet another bunch of mothers. In this installment, we find rank Frank praising the virtues of humor, without which he maintains one cannot play properly without praising the virtues of humor. Then they say, well, we've always thought Frank was a funny guy. The 201st Motel. Never saw that before. It's 201st Motel. All right, now we're going to go into this new band, which many people consider their favorite band. It's got Napoleon Murphy Brock, George Duke. Those are the newer guys. We should just play. Okay, let's just play a segment of this, of that, what they played back then. You know, what this new Mothers is like. All right, give a sample.
Yes. Now, I was thinking, Frank Zappa's music is the translation of the blasting.
Yes.
The blasting made music.
Made for the ear. Yeah, he's doing he's a vorticist. He's a vorticist.
page 67 says, place culture shock, dislocation of mind into meaning.
Yes. Culture shock dislocates mind into meaning.
Yes, and he was looking for people who did blasting.
Yeah.
Who will dislocate,
it was theater. He was also doing theater. He's like a bunch of gypsies. And he does have a picture in 1970 on the cover of Chunga's Revenge. The hand is coming down into the studio, but in the hologram that the studio is looking at, there's a vacuum cleaner. And he's called a gypsy industrial vacuum cleaner. And he's dancing around with castanets and acting like a gypsy. And it's like a camp with a little old cart or thing that you could live in, dragged by a horse or something. So it's this rustic scene out in the woods, and the gypsy is dancing around, and I can't remember what... Frank has a neat statement about it. But that's what they were doing, or they were replaying, or they could be seen that way. What did you just say? What made me go into that?
The blasting.
Oh, yeah, the blasting. So, yeah, he had this troupe.
I think this counterblast is a really good explanation of some art phenomenon, like a Zappa band.
Right, because, the Vortices did it with poetry and visual stuff and painting, but who had done it by sound? There's maybe a joke group here and there, but no one had the ability to do it on the level of Wyndham Lewis and James Joyce and Ezra Pound. They were geniuses. Frank did it to acoustic space. And
yes, and I like this slogan in page 32. What we call art will seem to be specialist artifacts for enhancing human perception. And that's the environment of Frank's music.
Right. Now, fix your mic. I want to get that clear. It's a little blurry. Put the mic near your mouth better or something. Say that again.
Yes. In the page 32, there is this type of slogan.
Yeah.
What we call art will seem to be specialist artifacts for enhancing human perception.
I get that. Yes. The job of art, that's his specialist job, enhance human perception. Now, what did I say? What did we say just before that? I was going to say, so he's a band. Oh, yeah, he's doing the ear. Now, Lewis, Joyce, and Pound, they kind of knew to present the visual, painting or books or poetry, with tactility as the ground. So then, 40, 50 years later, Zappa presents the ear with tactility as the ground. But the figure is the ear rather than the eye. So that's the replay by Frank in another mode. I mean,
I think the complexity of his music was, in a way, presenting the information overload.
Yes.
That you have to be trained to do pattern recognition, like code breaking.
Yeah.
In all this.
And this is why on the Tiny Note chart he deserves to be right beside McLuhan, because he's doing in the new ground of music, the society living entirely by music, and McLuhan couldn't do that, but he's doing the same anti-environmental role as McLuhan did.
Yes, I think it's the best translation of the electronic man.
Yes.